Да, Легион, Бричи, вот это все. Как вариант, может там тоже что-то есть.
Investigate the value of the stuff to make sure it's compelling, but we don't react to get rid of the
Все,
good
конечно,
value
хорошо.
to buff up the bad value
Можно.
ones so quickly.
Мне
Now,
кажется,
it's absolutely worth noting that disfavor is
очень
terribly
маленький
placed
процент
right now relative to the
игроков
difficulty of the
пользуются
content.
этим.
I completely
Чем
agree with
именно?
that example, right?
Ну
We
и
need to
вот
do
этими
something
уник
about that.
вычтованными.
Ну, уник, да, потому
There's
что
also a
15
supply and
зарядов
demand
очень
element,
ограничивают
right?
их использование.
Right now, Cyrus is a better use of your time than Maven, according to the math that we've shown there, right? So people will
Да,
kill
там
Cyrus a
надо
lot. They'll
типа
get a lot of the
обмазывать карты и все такое.
Знаете, засунул, они как у тебя будут висеть и будут.
and they become cheaper, and they kill
Ой,
less
что-нибудь
Maven,
поесть
so her
возьму себе.
uniques become more
Давайте.
expensive, and it does balance out to some extent. Now, I understand in practice, probably still better to kill Cyrus, but in theory, there are market forces that will cause it to equalize over time, right? People can choose what to spend their time on and what rewards are being generated. And we're kind of, like, as far as item progression in the game, we're wanting this thing where you start off upgrading your items from white to blue to rare. They sit on rare for a while till you find the good uniques to enable your build, and then ideally you can find effects on incredibly good endgame rare items that that are more useful for you than those uniques. You sit on those good uniques that are build enabling plus a combination of regular rares for quite some time, but the absolute pinnacle characters have really special rares. And there are mechanics that you can get from these bosses that enable the crafting of those or the transferring of influence mods and so on. And to some extent, those are more important for endgame character progression than merely adding to the supply of special uniques that come from that boss. So there's a bit more to it than just the value of the uniques because of the crafting items that can come from that pinnacle content as well.
So, specifically for the Maven, did you guys think about having her drop elevated rares occasionally?
I don't know if that was discussed as a option for her. I'd have to talk to the team, but they're pretty happy with where Maven is. Like, meta-wise, we'd like a few more of her uniques to be useful, and that's being evaluated, but, you know, the currency she drops is expensive as well, and one thing to bear in mind with Maven is, like, the whole endgame, you know, its days are numbered because we are working on new stuff for 3.17, so who knows if she'll exist in 6 months.
I think just dropping the elevated like rares would be a bit too strong, but currently I think the main displeasure for most people is that some of those items really are quite unusable. You say maybe if there's a meta shift or they do have their spot if people want to use them. In the current version of the game they're pretty unusable, and that's like 3 out of the 5 total drops or something. So they either need some sort of revamp there, or for that meta to shift pretty drastically for them to be worth anything.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I think a little bit is that whenever you guys put downsides on items, you've maybe overestimated how powerful the item it is, and the downside might be a little bit too hard to get around.
Yeah, unique items are meant to have downsides so they're not just superior to rares, but I understand if the balance is off, then they're trash.
What about Awakened Gems? They saw a very, very big change. Are you guys happy with where Awakened Gems are now? The biggest example is Awakened Hexproof. Went from being something people would love, like really, really chase down, and it is now 40 chaos, for example. And it just doesn't really do as much for the build. Whereas obviously you talked about in the past how that you guys wanted gems to be like different and exciting to you.
Yeah, the team are keen to add some power back to Awakened Gems, and so the intention is that we're going to be putting a bunch of power back on the level 5 versions of them, so it's a matter of finding the difficult to get gem and then also leveling it up to the top before you get some of that power. They also want to add new Awakened Gems that do more than just damage. Like, this philosophy of us trying to make sure the utility support gems are interesting, they want to bring back some powerful ones that are utility rather than pure damage to give players more options there. So there's a bit of discussion internally for Awakened Gems at the moment that's quite exciting.
So why were they targeted to begin with, though, Awakened Gems? Like, as part of this sweeping nerf? Like, there was lots that you could have nerfed and lots you did nerf. Why were Awakened Gems also, which were a pretty recent addition to the game, all things considered, that were doing a certain unique aspect for the, end game progression?
One of the reasons was that we made Awakened Gems in a hurry close to ExileCon under extreme time pressure, and there were judgment calls made there which other people would not have made later, and so we kind of sat on that for a while thinking, what are we going to do about these? But it was only during a big rebalance at 3.15 that we really could actually make those changes, and like with some of the changes in 3.15, people think it went too far. And so there'll be some recovery of power in that case. And this has helped that there's been community feedback on that as well. So a number of factors, half of which are mistakes, have led to this situation.
Yeah, the main feedback like I had initially was that it was like a lot of them just turned into glorified level 21s for like other gems. It was just like a few percent increase and it almost didn't feel worth converting to. So yeah, just a bit more uniqueness about them.
Another thing that very quickly after being implemented got changed was the alternative quality gems, which is probably one of the best parts of Heist.
Ага,
It felt
best part, то, что у меня на Aurus Hacker'е было, с одного Purity of Elements 117 Cold Pen. С Purity of Elements у меня было с одного не с гема, с качества гема альтернативного у меня было 117 Cold Pen. Как такое вообще выпустить могли, я не знаю.
a lot like they got nerfed just because of the existence of aura bots. So it's sort of the perception for a lot of people is almost like because aura bots exist, all the
Чё?
alternative like divergent gems and etc. got nerfed very, very hard. Are you happy with the current state of alternate gems?
Конечно. А
This
что?
is something I haven't discussed with the team recently. I remember them talking about the nerfing, and I can't remember if it was the same philosophy as Awakening Gems or not, so it's something I need to check with the guys to find out exactly why. A lot of these balance discussions don't happen with me in the room. I try to catch up on it, but this is one in particular that I wasn't involved in. Not that I ever contribute anything, I just make sure I understand so I can explain it, but this particular one, I know nothing about.
Okay.
I think they are kind of still okay. As long as the Aurabot builds exist and work, then I think they're mostly fine. Like, for example, I did some heists yesterday. I found an Aura gem that increases your, like, crit multi by 1% or something. So, you know, to the average user, absolutely worthless. But if an Aurabot can still utilize that, then it's still okay. And there's still, like, more than enough interesting alternates that justify the entire system, I think.
Yeah, we're very aware of the Aurabot situation where there's a lot of community outcry for us to do something about that, and this is something that's currently on the list for 3.16. Hopefully it stays on the list. There's some interesting new some skills being developed which are kind of meant to be a more game-friendly way of doing support characters, and they may not make it in. I have to emphasize that these are early prototypes, but you know, it's looking positive and looks like it'll be a lot more fun and interactive. So we'll see where that goes.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely like make sure you guys do continue talking about it because I kind of disagree a lot with what Mathel said that there's a lot of useful ones. They
Go
were
on, please. My entire chat just said you're really mad. I'm not sure I picked up on it, but
no,
let me
it's
have
just
it.
I would very much disagree with that because like they were when they came out, but like yeah, like you said, more than not do feel like oh yeah 1% more damage, excellent. Whereas when they
Yeah.
first came out, they were like a very very unique and changing thing. So it's sad to see that go away.
But I'm saying if that 1% more damage is still like useful for those Aurabots, isn't it still in an okay spot?
But I guess that's the entire problem in my opinion. Like I don't like it's great to have a build like Aurabots for the game where you really invest into build. I think that's very important, like in stackers, strength stackers. I personally and from like talking to people on Sunday, Aurabots because of them quote unquote destroying alternate gems for the rest of builds are kind of bad.
Okay.
I'll make sure my Aurabot team discuss that.
Nice.
Sorry, I got
Aurabot
the
team.
concept of an Aurabot team from chat. It's great.
Oh, that's nice. That's awesome. I'm trying not to read chat in case I'm upsetting a lot of people.
It makes the whole experience a lot more surreal
I bet.
to find out 10 seconds later whether you screwed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not good. I closed mine down for a bit and then I reopened it because you got to see what's happening, but I don't think it lets you focus enough on what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to focus and just stick to the questions because it's if we get through all of it, that represents quite a lot of different parts of the community.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions and they are quite diverse, which is good. I appreciate you taking into account everyone's opinions when putting it together.
Yeah, I think only like 3 of these were mine. So that's good.
0 of these were mine.
You actually said you well didn't have anything to add. You said you liked a lot of them.
I added some of the stuff that was already kind of there, basically.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Harvest has
oh
been
boy,
very, very contentious. Obviously, a lot of people are talking a lot about Harvest, and I remember something really stood out to me that you said on Bayclass, and that is when people get perfect items, they generally quit, right? And I saw a lot of people were not necessarily very happy about what you said there. But I do think there is a point in what you said, but it's slightly different. It's whenever people get to the point where they don't feel like they have a reasonable upgrade, then they quit. And that point is different with a player like Nugi, with a player like Mathil, or with a casual player. But it's always important for a player to feel like they have an immediate upgrade in sight. And that is why Harvest was so amazing in the original state. It was actually for a large part of the community, because drops right now, like, you pretty much outside of the first week, you aren't finding a drop. Nearly every item you use is crafted. That's like pretty much always that case. And most of the community weren't crafting perfect items. Like, they weren't crafting these perfect items and quitting. Um, so I'm wondering, have you guys? There's a couple of things about Harvest with where a lot of people aren't happy with it, and one thing that feels particularly bad is if you see, for example, you're fighting like Blister Lords or Divination Card Beasts, but you aren't getting their craft. Right? You'll see like the Reforge Influence Beast, 4 of them, 5 of them, and fighting them, but you're not getting the craft. Is that something you're happy with? Like the fact that it's all like percentage based and you're still fighting them?
When you find a patch of monsters, when you find a patch of plants, as it were, you can see what crafts you're going to get. So you can't see whether you're getting Blister Lords yet, but you do know I'm getting a Blister Lord craft, or none, or several, and that's a random outcome. But you can see what it is before you lock it in, and so you should make an assessment between the patches. Then you fight a group of monsters, and it may be that there are more Blister Lords than crafts, but that's because they're percentage based. And the reason why is you get 23 monsters in a patch, and having to do 23 crafts multiple times whenever you encounter Harvest is ages and ages of, tons of crafting that would otherwise be wasted. And so when we were rebalancing this, we wanted to make sure that the rarer ones occurred slightly more frequently, but there were fewer crafts overall that you're getting. That way you actually see some of the better
Душат
ones.
Криса вопросами.
But there is a disconnect between how many of the
Душат
specific
Криса
ones you get
вопросами.
and how many crafts you get about
Harvest
time. You do see
спрашивает.
them in advance. So yes, it does suck if you have a patch that includes no Blister Lord crafts, but then when you do the fight, there's some hard monsters in there. But that's just the random fight you're getting for the crafts that you have picked. As for the point about the progression of upgrading items, I completely understand that if a player has no feasible upgrades left, then there's no ability for them to improve their item, and that's the same as them having a maxed out item. They don't think it's getting any better, and then they have less incentive to play. If enough of their items are like that, then there's no reward for them to find. An important thing we have to do in Path of Exile is to make sure that there are incremental upgrades, and the system of diminishing returns is used in action RPGs for this kind of thing. Whenever you reroll, if you're starting with really bad items off the ground and you reroll them, it's easy to get ones that are marginally better. You can improve them. The amount of effort it takes to do each improvement gets higher and higher and higher. It's like leveling up after 80, right? It starts taking longer and longer and longer. And this spacing is appropriate for endgame because players implicitly understand with games that it takes slightly more effort to reach each thing. It's kind of a logarithmic scale. Now, that scale is a bit whacked at the moment in Path of Exile. There are a lot of reasons why you can just jump massively far ahead of the scale right to the really hard part. It's like if you suddenly level up from level 80 to level 98, you're suddenly saying it's taking so long to level at this point, I quit. And so that's kind of happening with items. Now, if you want the experience of how it's meant to work in a really pure system, try the hard mode thing I was talking about last week. It will really illustrate the item progression stuff, which is the point we're trying to make with that. But in the core game here, one of the reasons why Harvest, and I'm purposely not reading chat here, even though it's going crazy when I mention hard mode.
Yeah, I figured.
Is there a bingo card again? Great. Anyway, one of the things with Harvest here is we don't want it to allow people to get too far ahead of that item curve, and we're bearing that in mind with the changes we're making to it. But we get the feedback from players that people don't think Harvest is in a great place, and so we're going to have a look at it, right? Like for 3.16, we'll do a review of things. This is not going to be major, like we're not restoring it back to how it was before, but we'll have a look at the different costings and weightings and rarities and just make sure that it's good. But bear in mind, we're treating this as a premier, top-tier, powerful crafting system that's already in a dangerous place here. Like the goal is not to make it significantly more powerful. It's already a dangerous part of Path of Exile. At this stage, we're not discussing removing it. We do think it serves a really good purpose, and it's something players can look forward to that does provide some deterministic crafting. It's just really dangerous, and we want to be careful, because people think that they want a shortcut to get the best stuff, but that takes away a lot of the progression of actually building stuff up, you know, in a reasonable way. And it contributes to the problem where there's no point in looking at items that are on the ground, because they're averaging a 3 out of 10, and your crafting quickly gets you to the 8 or 9, and everything's squished up there in terms of getting the best items in the game.
But that's like a large problem for a lot of people. There's already very little reason to look for stuff on the ground. You're never going to compete with anything crafted, because like there's no such thing in Path of Exile, or there's very little like drop only modifiers, right? Like the I think the community have a very positive reception to things like the veiled buff, right? Because they can be very special and they are drop only. So yeah, you can actually find really special veiled modifier, but you're never going to identify a really well crafted influence item, and this like it's just never competing with crafted things ever, pretty much. Like there is virtually never a point where players are going to pick up an item, identify it, and find upgrades from that. Very little.
Yeah, and that's something that we're going to get fixed long term. It's not an instant thing, right? Like if we just make it so the ground drops insanely powerful stuff next expansion, then people will feel that the crafting options are terrible. We have to make sure that there's an interplay between the two systems, right? You're finding some things on the ground that are either upgrades or good bases, and then there's a way to interact with it with crafting. And crafting can't necessarily make the best stuff in the game, but can augment it.
Right.
And we have a plan here, and I think that a lot of the learnings we're getting from hard mode are instrumental here, because that's a case of us taking everything out and then seeing how it actually functions. And it's remarkable how certain crafting systems in Path of Exile are pretty optional these days. Now that doesn't mean we're changing it in the core game. We understand there's significant political problems with doing that. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how a comment someone made internally recently was, it's a testament to the strength of this item system that it's been so butchered over the last 30 expansions, but still works pretty well. And so that's something that we are very aware of, that itemization is not in a good place.
Right. Okay.
Приятного
Looping
аппетита.
back to Harvest before we move on to other things, like obviously there was a very multi-pronged nerf on Harvest. With obviously you can no longer use like augments or the annul augments at all on influence gear. Are you guys happy with how like that ended up happening with like everything at the same time? Like, are you specifically happy with how rare augments is now? Like, me and quite a lot of other players that play an extreme amount have never found one. So that makes it like very demotivating, because how is an average player ever going to find one?
Yeah, lucky.
I'm happy with the rates. I think Harvest is already too gifty personally, but I'm making sure to not have my view be 100% of the view in the office on this. There are some people who certainly are much more pro-Harvest than I am. Even though I created this problem in the first place by saying, guys, I want the most powerful crafting system the game has ever seen, let's ruin it, basically, is a kind of the spec of that experiment, which was a big mistake. But yeah, I'm fine with the current rarities in Harvest. I get the fact that some things are quite rare, but we would rather have them rare and possible than not possible. Like when we were designing the new Harvest, the question was, okay, let's remove all of that. And we had a think, wait, no, we should have it be aspirational. We can put some stuff in there that occurs very infrequently. And so we'd rather have those annul ones present than completely removed entirely. I mean, the other options happen to be really common, but then that's only making the item problem worse.
Sure, I think a lot of the thing that ends up feeling bad for players right now, that quite a lot of people brought up as a point, is that it's the only really deterministic way to craft items right now. If you find something where it's like you have a almost 0% chance of like using a normal exalted orb, right, or like a Leo research exalted orb to slam the item, a lot of people end up just sitting around with their item, waiting for harvest that never appears. So the item is just rotting in their stash because there is nothing comparable to it. It ends up feeling so bad.
So this is a communication problem. We have a situation where a person says, I have an item that could be improved by this thing, but this thing is incredibly rare, and so they're planning around a thing that's unlikely to actually occur. It's very much like if you rig your life so everything's perfect if you win the lottery tomorrow. That's a poor decision because you're probably not winning the lottery on the exact day that you want to. And so we probably need to communicate better that there are very rare aspirational outcomes there. It's like having your league starter be a headhunter build and then be somewhat annoyed about the fact you don't get one in time. And I know I'm being a bit facetious here, but I think the problem isn't make these insanely powerful crafts really common so that people's items dropping in the stash can be improved, but more a matter of making sure people understand that these are quite unlikely outcomes for them to get.
Well, I think the problem isn't that it's just not, like, really common. The problem is it's insanely rare. Like, you can't realistically hope to find it at the moment. Lots of people have just straight up forgotten these things exist and thought they got removed or completely nerfed. So I'd say there still needs to be a bit of a tweak on numbers for, like, some of the augments or whatever you've left in, because you took a lot out. So if you're leaving Harvest the way it is, like, as a mechanic, it probably still needs a few number tweaks. And my, other main gripe, I'd say, is it's just a bit hard to like count on Harvest as a system right now because it's currently in a couple of locations and it's you know, RNG to get it basically, but it's so far and away best for crafting a few things that you have to just run maps and hope for it to happen. Otherwise you feel like an idiot for going to some other crafting system because it's so much worse to do for a few items. So I think it would be better to have it be a bit more targetable or like usable in the system that it currently is in, because it just, yeah, I don't know, makes you feel weird about using the other crafting systems.
Yeah, I mean, there's some degree of targetability because it's present in the Atlas trees, of course, you can specialize there, and that is getting changed a bit in 3.16 as we reduce the number of regions and change the, you know, sort of simpler trees and so on with less duplication. And then again in 3.17, as we change the endgame, that may involve different ways of specializing so that you can target them more potentially. But one thing to bear in mind is this is already a system that's incredibly powerful. We have to be careful to make sure that it isn't just incredibly freely available as well. Like, having to be something to work towards is good. The point you were making about the values of how often the special crafts occur, there's a bit of a situation here where I'll sit here philosophically and say, nah, it should be rare. I don't know what the numbers are. I can't tell you how rare it is, right? My team will look at the numbers, and despite me going, we're keeping this rare, it's got to be rare, they'll look at the numbers and go, ah, yeah, okay, cool, and make it 4 times more common because that's the right number, right? So I'll sit here and defend this, and chat will say it's a trash answer and so on, and then the team will go and fix it because that's their job and they're good at it. I'm just making sure to represent the goal that we're trying to achieve. And our numbers could be wrong. We could have it 4 times rarer than it should be, and they'll come and fix it, and it still remains appropriately, well, it still remains relatively rare. Most players won't see it, but it's possible.
A lot of people are asking, is it possible to make Harvest tradable similar to Bestiary, maybe with a cost? Because right now you have a large portion of your community that are forced to use third-party tools like Discord to trade.
Okay, so let's discuss this one. This is a good one.
Хороший
Currently,
вопрос.
when you encounter a rare craft, you have some ability to save it in an annoying way, and some ability to trade that with other people.
Да, спрашивают тут Криса, будет ли введено такое, что можно было продавать эти, как его, крафты с Харвеста, как бестол запечатывать, допустим. Пусть будет какой-то кост, но можно было бы их продавать, потому что что это в игре другими так третьими источниками. Да, в ТФТ приходится лезть. Это как бы не всем нравится. А те, кто не лезут, тех часто скамят, как бы. Кто через чат торгует, через игровые источники.
Ну да, там хоть какая-то система есть с оцениванием, с репутацией, а в чате чем? По ачивкам смотреть.
Что это сейчас было такое? Нападение 40.
Ну как еще оценивают людей в чате?
Ну хуиз можно написать. Хуиз уж лучше. Хуиз тебе лучшую оценку даст, чем количество оценок. Если у человека 95 плюс, ну да.
Он тебя также может заскамить.
Да, если у человека 40 ачивок, он не может заскамить.
Нет, я в том плане, я сравниваю оценку в чате и оценку на ТФТ.
Ну,
Типа, как ты в чате будешь? Ну, 95-й, ну, допустим, и чё? Думаешь, он тебя не заскамит? Да заскамит, чё.
так соскамит.
Потом ник
in
поменяет и
way,
еще
in a
раз
way that they're
заскамит.
scamming, and it's basically a lot of counterparty risk, and it's very frustrating, right? So there's a nod to the ability to save and trade stuff in there. We haven't tried to make it entirely restricted to one character. But the
Ну,
question
типа,
is, why
закинешь
don't we
ты в
make it so
игнор
that
и...
it's easy
Ну
to
ладно,
trade?
все,
Why
тихо,
don't we make it
слушаем
so when you
ответ
find
Криса.
it, it's a special harvest currency item that you pull out of the window that you can then trade for 15 exalts because it's valuable. So what currently happens is, when people find relatively valuable crafts, a lot of them don't even notice. A lot of them forget about it, or store it and then never use it. A lot of them don't understand what it's for. There are many of these crafts that are entirely wasted, right? If we were to make it that instead this is a currency item you can pull out of the window, which will clearly look valuable or be easy to look up, then very few of these will be wasted, because if you're not interested in that craft, rather than just storing it or whatever, I love chat. Anyway, if you can just pull it out, then this thing will be basically 100% useful because you can go and trade it for exalts. And so this increases the number of those crafts occurring in the economy. And remember, that is not the goal here, right? Our analysis is that it would be a roughly 10 to 1 ratio. So we strongly considered having these be tradable, but then they would occur 10 times less often. And what would happen would be that you would never see one, except as available on trade for people who are lucky. And we feel it is much better to be occurring more commonly, and players who are onto it and know what they're doing can see it more often and actually use it for themselves rather than being forced to trade it. And yes, you could ask the question, no, I want the same rates and to be tradable, but that
Чё-то Крис вообще сложно ответил, блядь. Ебать, что как он вообще в ахуе. Очень что все он привел к тому, что при системе такой вот как бы, чтобы чел смог сразу понять стоимость крафта и продать его, приведет к тому, что крафтов станет больше доступно общественности, потому что куча людей, когда такой крафт находят, даже, мол, не подозревают об этом и забывают о нем и не юзают, а если они его запечатают, смогут проверить прайсы немедленно, то этих крафтов станет больше на трейде, это не то, что они преследуют, мол, и им придется еще дроп-рейд понижать, и тогда это приведет к тому, что челы, которые хотят получить этот крафт и знают о нем, вообще его никогда сами не увидят и смогут только покупать его втридорого на трейде. То есть это не то, что они преследуют, обратную проблему приведет.
Так, вон тут эти челы русские-то общались. Ну, я, конечно, ТФТ не чекал, но по словам там ауги, блядь, раз в 6 часов тебе выкладывают, настолько вот часто они падают. На данный момент. Если это для Криса много, то типа хз.
Ну да, он хочет, чтобы это вот супер редко был, потому что лугом ты гарантированно иногда можешь получить супер крутой предмет. Он сказал,
Ну
что...
смотри, работяга казуал, он вообще никогда в жизни...
У него
просто-
денег не
он
будет
10
никогда.
лиг будет...
Так у него денег на лук никогда не будет, сколько они там
10 лиг
экзактов
будет
стоят.
играть, он даже ни разу не увидит.
А зачем ему это? Ему что, минмаксить надо? Конечно, ему это не надо, и правильно. Зачем работяге нужно лук, дядя Миша?
А зачем? Пусть работяга вообще акведук долбит, да?
Нет,
Чё ему этот эндгейм-контент?
ну, нет, я считаю правильно, что в дешевых шмотках сложно закрывать его сейчас стало. То есть билды понерфили. Это, я считаю, правильное решение.
А то есть смотря, как развиваться, допустим, новичку.
Да, есть же куча источников дешевого фарма. Просто надо погуглить и посмотреть знающих людей. Тот же самый хайст. Дядя Миш. А? Кто хайст фармит? Ну-ка, признавайтесь быстро. Он же вообще вложений не надо, если маленький бегает. Что-то я не понял, что происходит. Ну, не знаю, сложный вопрос, сложный, дядя Миш. Ну, конечно, было бы удобнее, если бы ввели трейд через крафтами, как какалевый. Это, безусловно, было бы охуенно и удобней. Хуй знает, что он там каким-то привел к тому, что они бы стали бы чаще появляться. Какая-то хуйня, по-моему, что там куча людей о них не знает, скипает их и все такое. Это, мне кажется, бред. Да если он скипнет его, он же не будет тебе сразу запечатанным. Или он к тому, что они будут все чекать сразу же. Не знаю, мне показался ответ Криса странным. А что наши по этому поводу говорили-то? общались. Раз.
Ну, который на СС играет, ну, говорит, ну, чё, ну, ладно, так пусть нормально, а который
Так, на
на
SSF,
трейде...
на SSF им и рероллы хороши на SSF, будем откровенны.
Который на трейде, как бы, ну, вот Антон и Агроморф, который, блядь, всю эту лигу долбил. Дистанты. Ну, типа говорят, ну, чё, такое себе грустно, конечно, что, типа, вот эти топ хай-тир крафты, их вообще нету, грубо говоря, в игре. Что столько народу играет, и как бы крафты появляются раз в 6 часов. Ну, это смешно. На трейде.
Их купят еще перед тобой, потому что они
Да,
только
и
будут...
ты просто ты никогда их не увидишь. Хоть в игре, хоть не в игре, просто их не увидишь.
Угу. Ну, тут инфлюенсы там... Инфлюенсы, я знаю, что невозможно купить. Манипуляции с инфлюенсами там плотно
Ты тут-
сидят на них.
Тут, по словам с обычными аугами тоже как бы проблемы хорошие.
Ну, я не знаю, что в этой лиге, но в той я обычно луги покупал.
Ну, в той лиге и народу все-таки больше играл.
Я покупал стихийный, дефенсный. Ну, нормально. Я бы не сказал, что их было невозможно купить в той. Про эту ничего не знаю. В этой лиге я нихуя не покупал. Никаких аугов.
Сейчас подаю.
Угу.
That's going
Куда? Крис убежал.
often, and what would happen would be that you would never see one, except as available on trade for people who are lucky. And we feel it is much better to be occurring more commonly, and players who are onto it and know what they're doing can see it more often and actually use it for themselves rather than being forced to trade it. And yes, you could ask the question, no, I want the same rates and to be tradable, but that's going to, again, cause the item problem we're trying very hard to not have.
But why specifically, like, so from what you just answered, it seemed like you were talking about specifically making the really valuable untradeable, right? Because you pointed out that, like, people would then know that they were valuable. But what if you just make it, like, really expensive? Like, either an orb or something that has to drop? Something, maybe it's, maybe you have the intention that only, like, big crafts are traded, so something worth at least 30 chaos, or 60, or 100, whatever the number is, right? That's not important. But just make it so that
Ты вот говоришь
any
всякие
craft should be tradable, not necessarily
доступные
just the
фармы
augments.
малышам. Хейст,
You know,
потому
if
что
you're
там
worried about
голову просто
letting people
проломит.
know that they're valuable.
Ну тогда вообще, так скажем, пое
A trade,
для умных.
change the tradability.
Мне нельзя как в КС зайти, блядь, и в головы пострелять. Ну, не так работает, блядь.
Ну, нет, это как бы да, но есть такая проблема, что для умных-то для умных, но тогда
Играть
она и
меньше будут.
развиваться меньше
Да,
будет.
да, да.
Тоже как бы кому это на руку? Как бы, ну, умные люди поиграют, потом в другое во что-то уйдут.
Да.
В Реал.
Сейчас
А
она
приток игроков не будет, а смысл тогда? И все. Умрет игра.
как копатели в Реал ушли, да, некоторые?
Мгм.
Все, шахту закрыли.
Со следующей лиги или с какой там, с 3.17, когда
А у работов
работов пофиксят, то все, и не копатели уйдут. Все пачки развалятся.
пачки заколебали уже. Че они валюту печатают? Пусть им-то делают, блин, это, что не x2 моб, а x10 моду. Пусть там улюлюкают как-нибудь. У них так не x2, у них x6 мобы, но... Ауработ дает столько, что хоть x6, хоть x10.
А еще и курс.
Но
боты.
в начале
Еще
лиги,
больше.
на самом деле, пачки страдали, они не могли пойти Т-16 в говне фармить. Конечно, когда появились деньги, они могли уже хоть что, как раньше играть, но в начале лиги это было заметно, эти нервы.
Мгм.
Я за то, чтобы понерфили Хедхантер. И чтобы сразу
appropriate
народ
choice
еще
there
ушел.
or a cost that's very high. And these sound good in practice
Да
until
мне
you hit the
кажется, с
numbers
Хантером не
and
так много
you'll be
народу
unhappy
играет.
with those. And so
Бесполезный предмет абсолютно. Не уважаю билды, которые через Хедхантер играют, потому что не билд твой играет, а Хедхантер.
Ну кого же в этой лиге ищут? Хиден пофиксили, понерфили, вернее.
Ну, так нам же доказали, что не понерфили. Или
Не
понерфили. Нет, ну кто-то же...
Нет, ну если это как бы правда, то мне кажется, это как бы неплохо, ну, существенный нерв, то что если на тебе висит баф, то ты
Это
получаешь такой же
офигенный
баф, а он не обновляется.
Да, это правильно. Но
И
вроде
типа,
как
а
Тюна
много ли
показал...
ты рарников найдешь на карте, чтобы там поддерживать нормальный стаков? Нет, и я не спорю, конечно, когда идет фарм какой-то
Заряженные
контенты
мапы.
заряженных, ну, мапок, либо симулятора, либо легиона, там ты как бы будешь бегать под всем.
Мгм.
Ну, просто на картах, мне кажется, он как бы слабее стал.
Да, просто для карты только ушеги покупают мажики. Хантер покупает, чтобы что-то фармить.
Да на самом деле он тоже многим не подходит.
Лагает за ним.
Ну, это одна из причин. Типа, дот билды, как бы нахуй он не нужен. Сумонеры, тотемщики. Кто еще есть? Такие же ребята все. Не особо им надо. Не везде он сядет на тебя.
Ну да. Ой, бешеная с спидом. Так, спидом. Убираем анимешник. Не успела в этот раз. Решила крылышками помахать. Bound to walls.
yeah, I think like from a QOL point of view and stopping scamming, yeah, it's good, but it's not going to be what people want as a solution to this. Like, we would want it so that we can look at the logs and say how many of these crafts are done, and the number has not gone up as a result of this action. We want to improve the QOL and ease of life for this without having increased the amount of crafting that's happening as a side effect. And I'm pretty sure the steps we would have to take to achieve that would not be ones that people are happier with. And at the moment where you have a highest chance of getting it yourself, but you have to be paying some degree of attention and
Ну,
care.
Крис прямо прямым языком сказал, что он боится Хайста. Фу, не Хайста, а Харвеста. Боится того, что было в Харвесте. Ситуация напугала его и команду. Ну, это на самом деле. И главное, толстяк хочет, чтобы все так же было, как в Харвесте. Ага.
Place for it to be.
Когда у тебя в билде было 6 миррор-шмоток, да, отличная ситуация и у всех. Вот даже работяги могли позволить себе, потому что им даже не надо было бы их крафтить, они купили бы их по дешевке на трейде. Миррор просто шмотка, представляешь, на трейде за 7 экзальта. Нормально, дядя Миша? Я не считаю, что это было правильно.
Не, ну вот ритуал, помнишь? Там падали частенько. Ну там, по-моему, еще ремувы, да, были?
Не знаю, я уж не помню. А мне кажется, ремулов сразу же их убрали, нет?
Нет, их не сразу убрали. Вроде. Их, по-моему, после ритуала убрали.
Ремувы это... А, ну да, да, помню. А что вначале убрали? Просто реже сделали или еще?
Не, вообще их нет в игре.
А, одну лигу вообще не было Харвеста, понял. Его просто...
Одну лигу Харвеста не было, потом в ритуале вроде как ввели то же самое, только сделали автоматически, ну, чтобы не надо было сад строить.
А, и
потом-
20 крафтов, наверное, еще. Или 10, сколько там было.
Не, 10. Вот, а потом в ультимейте уже ремувы убрали. Я так вроде помню. И в ритуале как бы не то что более-менее, мне кажется, ну, было бы норм, если бы чистоту оставили как в ритуале, ну, может, чуть-чуть подрезали, ну, без ремувов, соответственно.
Угу.
Просто там хотя бы были, там хотя бы, ну, Ты их мог увидеть.
Да.
Тут ты бегаешь хайварки весь день, весь месяц, и как бы ни одного ауга, и такой, типа, заебись,
Ну,
мне нравится.
вот это я не шарю, я не бегаю хайрварки, вообще нету, да, значит? Как бегающий хайрварки
Ну,
спрашивают.
я в той лиге не бегал, я ли в той лиге бегал? Он ни одного за всю лигу не увидел.
Это охуенно.
Это охуенно.
Спасибо.
И как бы аук, это, мне кажется, не миррор тир, чтобы его не видеть.
Ага. О, квантить. One with nothing. Что за карточка? 4 хаус.
Это которая
Карточки.
та самая, чтобы ручками бить. Драйвер.
Все понял.
Than to have it so the same number of crafts are occurring, but it's foolproof. And foolproof means a lot of fools are making money. Right now, you can profit from it if you're paying attention and are smart and know what the crafts do and make an effort to trade them to other people and so on.
So you're mostly happy with people using third-party platforms instead of having a way of trading them?
Because of these consequences, yeah. I mean, I don't want players to be scamming each other, right? Like, that's not good. But at the same time, right now, this is what we feel is the best way from a trade
Неизвестно,
point of
что они
view.
изначально от Харвеста
It's been
хотели. Тут
discussed
тоже надо,
relatively
на самом деле,
extensively,
учитывать
and
такую точку
it's
зрения.
unfortunately not as simple as
Может,
just
просто
saying,
они сделали его таким, как бы игрокам-то
If you
зашло,
make it
но...
tradable, it basically just turns all of the
Ну, это
house crafts into new versions of currency orbs that don't
типа
exist in the
изначально
game,
задумывалось
right?
как
Which
что-то другое.
seems a bit
Потому что
weird.
когда,
They are
ну, у тебя,
tradable.
конечно, есть команды, чтобы потестить и
But
все
no,
такое, но
well, his point
это
is,
не то же
like,
самое, когда и
apparently
тестит
it's hard or
там,
annoying,
блядь,
so it deincentivizes
несколько
them
сотен
to-
тысяч человек.
Ну, как
Well,
они
okay.
quality
That
гемы не
And so
допустили.
do
Ладно, Харвест
Ну,
сложнее.
блядь, ну а
Whole
сколько? Ты
thing
представляешь, 500
you'd have
гем,
to,
ну,
like,
блядь,
lower
100
the,
гемов выкатить?
Ну, они же знают, что
Всё
есть
потестить.
эффект аур, блядь.
to have that happen, and thus you can make much better items.
Ну, вроде на Акведуке потестили, показалось, более-менее.
Нормально, да, к виду показать.
So, I'm with Chris. Roast
Ну а
me.
как, думаю, у
I'm
них
not.
как
I
бы
play
достаточно
this fight
вещей, на
very,
которые
very
можно
procedurally.
работать, и типа в каждую дырку залезть, учитывая, что все это выкатывается за 3 месяца. Тут тоже.
А тут они на чем-нибудь облажались в этой лиге? А,
Ну,
ну,
фласки.
резервы они подняли обратно, опустили обратно. Ну, то есть немного.
Фласки, они вообще так, из башки. Как бы идея была, но
Ну, сейчас
они
фласки
подумали,
вообще
вроде нормально.
меньше заряда все-таки дают. Я просто тут ношусь 200 МС, и я не особо замечаю, но они меньше дают, да, по идее, сейчас?
Зарядов меньше, да, ты с монстров получаешь.
Окей.
Соответственно, состояние они не снимают.
Угу, ну, надо прожимать
Постоянно.
их правильно, чтобы они не ну, если на крафт, надо только под состоянием, блядь. Типа, очень быстрая игра, где порой там мини-секунды все решают. Хуй ты
У
что-то
них
нажимаешь.
фласки тоже, да.
То, что по
Потом,
разу большинство можно заявить. Я
Я,
помню,
конечно,
Кортекс,
Синдереллу эту не юзал, но что-то Антон говорил, что там 100 с лишним зарядов надо, чтобы ее юзнуть. Я такой думаю, блядь.
все верно.
Ну, а охуенную фласку сделали. Типа один раз нажать и потом на следующей карте следующий раз нажать или что?
Но
в чём
за
смысл?
свои деньги он слишком много дает. Она дает, считай, и сустейн, выживаемость, и урон.
Сустейн?
Да,
Это
рекаверит же тебе все.
не
Ну,
все.
не
В этой
всё.
лиге только один ресурс.
А,
Их разделили.
её разделили же еще.
Да.
Ну, все равно она слишком дешево стоит, и правильно. Кортекса я заметил, что теперь только можно юзать это один раз. Раньше, помню, 2 раза можно было его прожать. А, ну еще, может, почему я не сильно ощущаю, я же сейчас бегу с флаской, которая заряду другим дают фласк.
Ну да, это что-то минус слот. Что он хоть делает? ХП восстанавливает или ману?
Consecrated Ground полезно из полезного создает определенно.
А, это сульфур фласка,
Да.
получается. А,
И 40
утилити.
урона дает, значит.
Мгм.
Кстати, за всех сотни нет, но уже 50 сириусов, ни разу экзальта с пола БТВ не падал.
Мне
Редко?
тоже в этой лиге мало. Ну, что-то 4 или 5 выпало. Ну, с учетом того двойного.
Ну,
Ну,
он же не
два.
с пола, а с коробки.
Ну, блядь, а что ты хочешь с пола? С пола в первый акт зайти? Блядь,
С мобчика.
с белого моба конкретно.
С белого.
Про Mirror то же самое будешь говорить, типа, дадут, не дали. Нужно, чтобы с пола.
Не, ну Mirror как дали, так
Какое-то
дали.
какое-то хуёвое у тебя условие. С пола. Дали, не выебывайся.
Таких вордов рбы не дают. Ничего не дает, Крис, жадный.
И так никто не играет еще и
Ну,
игроков не удерживает.
Карлик много валюты давал. Не знаю, как сейчас после нервов, но на нем можно было бабки делать.
Ну, блядь, если покупаю, значит, можно. Он за другую валюту.
Ну, ты очень много боссов бегал. Понерфили ведь шанс дядя Миша, да?
Сложно сказать.
Сложно сказать. До сих пор не уверен. А где, блядь, за 8, за 6 часов?
Я Блэки один день бегал.
Да, ну...
А по сути только Блэки 68+. Ну там Блэки еще какие-то.
То есть ты проебался, имеешь в виду к этому.
Ну,
да?
я мог проебаться, потому что в Сане точно, блядь, по идее, на 81 только плюс.
Угу.
Потом там какие-то еще, там, по-моему, 75 плюс, а остальные 68. Две. Варана 68 плюс и Медведь 68 плюс, которые в ямках, они там повыше тир.
Ямочные.
Ну, Блэки я только один день бегал, хз, возможно, поменьше стало. Сложно сказать, может, не везло.
Сейчас аномалия абсолютно себя неадекватно повела. Она поехала влево и вверх, убивая тебя после вызова Сириуса. Если у меня был бы менее живучий билд, я просто бы сгорел за мгновение. А еще в этой лиге аномалия уж совсем себя показала. Я всегда стоял рядом с палаткой, ожидая, что приедет Сириус. Так она взяла, вот это нижнее у палатки, поехала, раздавила меня и палатку. Я что-то вообще охуел.
Ой, бывает.
Че? Чуть мне метеорит урона не нанес. Мне кажется, я от него увернулся.
Задоджил.
Задушил, да. Подожди, что метеорит урона не нанес? Так, подожди, посмотрим. Chance to block attack damage. А мне тут доджа отспыло. Ну ладно. Промазал уж. Что-то голос. Нифига себе, инкрис армора много. Т2, Т1. Все равно ничего не стоит. О, эта база стоит. Топорок. Топорок стоит что-нибудь? Double stun duration, дядя Миша. Как тебе мод? Надо double stun duration тебе.
Звучит как-то страшно.
15, 15, 30 хаусов яички стоят. Ну, в портал зайти.
It's not that. Well, yeah, actually, this is, yeah, looking a little bit up for the more casual player, because this is obviously very heavily incentivized towards more no-lifers and stuff like that, more than anything.
Shouldn't they be rewarded for no lifing?
Sure, but there's a happy middle ground where you aren't forced to use third-party stuff.
Yeah, and there are ways to achieve that. Like, for example, having secure trade of some kind of complicated system where you take someone to your harvest crafting bench and you have the ability to put up a complex trade screen where instead of like, here's my item, here's the currency that I'm paying you and so on, you do it in one action where it's done securely. That reduces scamming. It's also a real pain, and for the time being, we're not doing that. And this has come up in discussion, like, for example, we're making some guild changes in 3.16, and one of the things we were looking at, which was eventually not done in 3.16 because it's hard, is the concept of having, like, shared mastercrafts among guild members who are online at the time, or even friends who are online at the time, potentially, where you have the ability for, like, you've got a mastercraft, I want to use it. Normally, I give you my item, I give you the currency for the craft, and I give you, like, a tip for your time, and then you leave with all of them. And then customer support doesn't do anything about it. And I'm not blaming our customer support department because there are a lot of false reports, I should add, about the scamming thing. That's why
Right.
we have to establish a pattern. But long story short, the ability to do that kind of trade securely is something that would benefit the game. We aren't doing it at the moment because there's other things we want to work on, to be honest. That's a bit of a pain to implement. But that would help the harvest situation from the point of view of safety without necessarily increasing the danger very much.
Right. Next up, a lot of people in the community are asking if you guys have talked about, for example, a lot of people want to know if bringing Harvest back to full power would be okay at the cost of making items soulbound or non-tradable.
Okay, let's talk about soulbound stuff. So there are two problems with this approach. The first one is once an item is soulbound, it can't be traded, and that means you've just got a thing that you cannot give away to someone else. So the value that you've put into getting it is gone, right? This is a big downgrade in your character's value, as it were, because normally in Path of Exile, you get items, you equip them, you use them, and then you have the ability to trade them for other stuff. You're not taking a net worth hit as an exchange for using things. It's relatively hard to find soulbound stuff in real life. I was thinking about this, right? If I buy the autopilot upgrade for my Tesla, that's $10,000 that's essentially soulbound, because then if I take my car and sell it to someone else, they turn that upgrade off, right? So that's licensed to me personally. It's like one of those codes you get with a game back in the day, which is only using, it's only enabled on your Xbox account, then when you trade the game, they don't have that. And so I am not willing to spend this money on self-driving because of the fact that when I resell my car, that money was lost. It was entirely for my benefit. So there is an economic problem with soulbound items in action RPGs where your player takes quite a big step backwards wealth-wise at the point that they acquire it. The second problem here is that bringing Harvest up to full power as a compromise here is also the direction we don't want to go. We don't want people to get 10 out of 10 items so quickly, right? Like, as far as we're concerned, Harvest is the problem, not the solution to the itemization here. And so, while I appreciate the, the direction of inquiry, it's something that we don't think would help in this case, sorry.
Sure, yeah, no, just a lot of people wanted the answer to that. I'm not sure if I like the IRL analogy. Like, I don't know how much you go around throwing fireballs IRL either, so, but...
Economies, you can learn from real life economies, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
good to look at the experience that humans have had over thousands of years trading things between people, and we do look at economics, and we do care about this stuff when we're designing Path of Exile's economy.
Right. Next on the list, I think we're done with Harvest. You'll be happy to know. That's like the main things there that people were bringing up.
Wait, I'll say one
Yeah.
actually. The still Harvest related.
But wait,
of
there's
course.
more.
The current Oshabi spawn rate is horrible, right? I think. Like, I've played, since the revamp. I've done Ritual, Ultimatum, and now this league, and I've still yet to encounter this boss. And I've done every harvest and like all of that. I mean, that might just be a
feedback.
Yeah, that's just a small, piece of feedback or something. But that boss doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned right now.
they are re-evaluating harvest, right? And that's going to mean looking at the Ashabi spawn rate. So yeah, it may be increased. I'm not philosophically opposed to that. I know I've just said no for a long time, but yeah, that can be improved if people feel it needs to be.
Yeah.
There we go. We got a yes out of Chris in a harvest-related topic. You're welcome, community. I'm now your hero.
Криса спросили, чё Шаби не вылазит. Крис не нашел, что ответить. Говорит, нету Шаби. Матхилл сказал, играл все лиги, после верфа Харвеста ни разу босса не видел. Каждый Харвест на карте делал, все делал, босса не видел.
А он играет по 3 месяца в лигу.
Вот так вот.
Wait, she doesn't let you craft, right?
А сейчас вообще ее нельзя встретить, только с семки, да, встретить, и потом уже через семки.
Вроде как да.
Я тоже ее ни разу не видел. В тех лигах. Ну, конечно, убивал, но самому никогда не находил. Что там, и пяточки Ашаби щекочет, или как это называется?
Oh no. Okay, next up. So, Smart Loot. Smart Loot gets asked about a lot, and things like, for example, seeing a big reduction on like maybe the drop pool, so that there's more things, like less clutter. Obviously, you talked about being able to remove things from the filter, which is great. But yeah, rares in general is very unexciting right now. You very rarely drop upgrades. And have you thought about doing more drop-only mods like veiled items, incursion, or simply higher tiers that are drop-only?
Не, проблема с рарными решается, чтобы они просто как в ГД падали опознанными. Вот на самом деле вся проблема с рарными решается, чтобы они падали опознанными. И можно было бы в этом фильтре установить, как в ГД, чтобы тебе свистело, когда падают хорошие моды, блин.
А вот по поводу этого Крис что-то говорил, потому что Рейс его на предыдущем спрашивал, нахуя вообще виздомы? Типа, не проще ли вообще убрать вот эту систему с опознаваниями? Ну, Крис ему там что-то выдал. Я уж особо не помню, да я не особо слушал, что он там говорил. Но вот я помню, такой вопрос был. Задавался.
Крис, значит, что-то выдал на это. Ну-ка,
Что-то он поэтому выдавал.
Сейчас послушаем.
Вопросы?
Похоже просто.
Items are better for your character or for your build. Like, we're never going to look at what you're playing and then try to drop something that's for you. The goal is that we want to make sure that items that drop on the ground are compelling items.
Скорее всего, знаешь что?
Что-то
Что-то в районе типа, ну вот тогда игроки в фильтрах действительно поставят все, и типа вообще ничего не будут подбирать только вот это, а ему хочется, чтобы подбирал рарку, такой, о, нихуя, что мне выпало.
Ну еще проблема тогда опять же с количеством дропа для заряженных картах и на пачках. Там просто можно, мне кажется, крутых шмоток подотропать, блять. Очень интересный момент тут, да. Да, и тогда надо будет точно количество дропа урезать. Есть такая система, что сразу опознанные, правда. Уж какая-нибудь пачка Империона точно на рапиру на 700 пропускает стабильно каждую лигу. На земле. Я пока на земле.
Ну да.
подставил лапу мне. Сучью-то лапу не отдавил. В темноте ее подставил. Пока я себе делал лекарство, дядя Миша, у меня к тебе возник очень интересный вопрос. А знаешь ли ты, дядя Миша, как работает Maven Orb? Просто
Понятно.
я так задумался над мирной головой на миньонах. Когда ты кидаешь Maven Orb, то он уберет... Он решафлит остальные моды, кроме влияния.
Не.
Нет? А, да, тогда, допустим, да, нормально все. Просто только подумал, если он решафлит, то как можно вообще мирошлем сделать с 30% мора?
Пока ты делал себе лекарство, у меня экзик упал с обезьян.
Нихуя себе, вот так вот. Экзик с обезьян. Ну, вот обезьяны много чего. Они поди у кого-то другого стащили его, дядя Миша, и вот ты его себе забрал.
Мне отдали.
Обезьяны. Ой, невозможно таким горячим пить.
Блядь, сдох нахуй теперь все оку перебегать. Ну нахуй ее. Что нового создать?
Что, за экзиком не побежишь, подожди, или что?
Да нет, блядь, на этом. На маяке нахуй. Убили меня. И все, теперь
А
всё.
это там взрывается, как Феникс один, тебя взорвал, поди. Косплеит Феникса. Его фанат. Взрываете ли тебя
Да нет, пока шел по этой штуке.
Да, это новые рарники, которые ебало ломают.
Мне кровотечение накинули, и все нахуй. На месте стоишь, там мобы все время появляются. Не на месте стоишь, и тохнешь сразу.
Так, меня будто вы сегодня пока бежал, там Делириум, конечно, вылез на мапе, но урона вообще модов не было. Было так каспит, так на меня какой-то делировский пуджик напрыгнул, и нахуй 9 КС снес, учитывая все остальные мои защитные механики ваншота. Я такой на это посмотрел и подумал, ты чё, блядь, Крис, дубу дал? Единственное, может, анимешник рядом не было, ну, то есть Fortify не висел, но все равно как...
Ты ему отдал топор?
Да, конечно.
Теперь он у тебя больше не малыш?
Да я ему сразу топор собрал, дядя Миш.
Не знаю, я думал, ты ему палку дал. Ветку эту.
Не, я ему сразу все дал. Единственное, я ему перчатки хуёвые покупал. Но сейчас-то я ему и перчатки, потому что у меня кольцо на плюс левел к анимешнику. Я ему и кольцо, и перчатки с вольной дал. И на бег ботинки, потому что, чтобы бегать быстрее. Ну то, что у него, блядь, веритание... Ну это девочка была, она своими женскими путями у него топор отняла. Он же дурак, дядя Миша. Куда полез-то кровать грязный? Слезь с кровати. Я ее менял не для тебя. Слезь, говорю, что ты на меня смотришь? Иди сюда. Молодец. Нечего заляживаться. Трется там где-нибудь в коридоре, потом ляжет на кровать.
Better relative to crafted items. Now, there are two ways this can be done, right? In hard mode, it's easy because you just gut the crafting system out, so it's very special, and dropped items on the ground are still just as terrible as they currently are, and there's far fewer of them and all of that kind of stuff, right? Which is great. In the core game, however, we do not want to take a step backwards in terms of players' expectations there. And so this means that when we're dropping items on the ground, we have to do systems like what we were previously describing in the decluttering thing, where it generates better res. They're not better in the context of your character, they're just better than regular res in the game that you would normally get. Now, we're not ready to go into more detail on specific plans there, because we're still working on it, and to some extent the hard mode experiment is very instructive here. I know I bring it up a lot, but we are very interested to see, because it helps us tune. Like, it's a permanent beta as far as I'm concerned, right? Mid-league changes all over the place. This is a big experiment. And it lets us tune the ratio between crafted and dropped items. And while we're not going to go to the core game and say, you're now hard mode, we can learn from how people interact with the, with crafting and with item drops based on what we do with the ratio in hard mode. And that will be really good.
So is hard mode more of a just currently like a learning tool for you guys to kind of relearn the game and like the basics and what's important and what's not? Or are you fully expecting a lot of people to jump in and want to play this thing as well?
I don't really mind how many people play it. I'll be playing it, and I want some people to trade with, but that's about it.
So-
but seriously, I'd be happy just keeping it as an internal tool. It's just that a lot of people are writing in saying they want to try it, and there's no harm to deploy it. It's easy, it's just an alternate league flag, so there's no particular harm there. I'm not expecting the average path.
Так, тут про хардмод заговорили, а в хардмоде, дядя Миша, ты слушал, говоришь, что там вообще будет, помимо просто дропа очень мало будет. всего.
Дропа меньше будет, потом инфлюенса, я так понял, вообще не будет на шмотках.
А? Откат к баз, к бейсикам.
Что типа того. Ванила, так
Ну,
скажем.
У них и сразу обратно многие в цене взлетят, блядь.
Вот, я так понял, это основные моменты все-таки вот такие. Ну, да, типа просто шмоток меньше будет, валюты меньше будет, всего меньше будет дропаться. И типа ты себя будешь чувствовать мега хуёво.
Бомжом будешь себя, хомлес, хомлес true experience. Что, хомлес этого Хантера накопил, никого он не хомлес.
За 2 дня.
Ебало.
Of XL player to necessarily jump in. It's a
Подводишь
mode where you
шейпера
can't
по делу.
experience all the content because the content is too difficult. That appeals to some people massively. Like they hear that and think, I can't do the high content, I'm going to try. And that's a challenge. But for a lot of people, they want to see what the game has to offer. We've spent a lot of money making sure there's a lot of fights in the game, and they want to play them all, and they want to feel like a god the whole way through. In hard mode, you feel like very rewarded when you get even close to god mode, and so it's a different type of reward system, and I don't think it'll appeal to everyone. And we're not, like we don't have high expectations because it's going to be a slow burner. It's like SSF. We released SSF initially and had a very small uptake, like less than 1% of players or something like that, and it's gradually becoming a more popular way to play. This is the same kind of thing, and we want to cater to multiple groups. And while I am super, super excited about it, because it's like a free time hobby to tinker with this, it isn't the core thing that we wake up and go to work to do, right? Like we are working on mainline Path of Exile content and lots of it.
So
Are you worried it might like? Sorry, I'll just finish. Are you
Блядь,
worried it might
эти
cause like more sort of
расёе.
elitism amongst
Пизда,
people and say,
похоже,
oh, you're not
всем.
even playing SSFHC hard mode. You know, what does your opinion matter or whatever?
I really like the idea of some guy linking some pretty damn average rare boots on Reddit or whatever and saying, look at what I found in hard mode. And the other hard mode players are like, give them to me. You got 3 resists and run walk. I
Немножечко
need
живой.
these today. Right? Whereas normally it's complete trash and you wouldn't bother to list it on PoE.trade. And so elitism in the case that it actually took a ton of effort is okay. I know it's a negative thing. Like we fought it with the hardcore community in the past,
Тут
where
Крис интересную вещь сказал, что он хочет в хардкор моде увидеть.
it would cause a lot of problems.
Он хочет, чтобы в хардкор моде был, ну там, допустим, какой-нибудь Reddit, блядь, хардкор моде, какой-нибудь чел с хардкор мода, линканул такие средненькие абсолютно ботинки, даже фиговенькие для, ну, обычных модов игры. Но в хардкор моде все бы так офигели от этого.
Да, чтоб... Ты типа, ты один карту линканул в чат, все таки воу, до карт дошел.
And that was something we had to really put a lot of effort in. And we may find a similar elitism with this, but people know what hard mode is, right? Like they know it's for that kind of player and they can just go and play the main game because I don't think we're going to face an elitism problem there that's large.
right. So I wasn't planning on bringing up hard mode a lot, but so regarding hard mode, this is something that is only going to be for the 0.1% of the 0.1%. So I think a lot of the player base are pretty worried when you keep saying that you're going to get lessons from it, because the people playing that and giving you feedback is not going to mirror the average player that plays your game. So what kind of like that's like I think what a lot of people are worried about.
It's being able to get feedback from a stripped down version of something helps you make assumptions, helps you make changes to core assumptions in the game. It lets you look at, like, right now, if I say, what percentage of items are equipped that came from the ground without modification? The answer is going to be very low, close to 0. That's not the right amount. But what is the right amount? We can determine that with something like hard mode, where we can turn the knobs really easily because it's quite simple, and it's one that we can just play with over time. We're not necessarily looking at opinions from the hard mode users. We understand the opinions are going to make it harder, blah, 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 right?
Что там дети на улице
That's
кричат
cool,
или
but that doesn't
собаки
necessarily
лают?
reflect the user who's
Поздно
chosen
как-то
not to play
детям
hard mode.
кричать.
But we will be looking at data from users that are playing hard mode and our own anecdotal opinions as well. And yeah, I get the understanding that it's like we announced the Xbox version of the game a few years ago, and there was a complete meltdown of the community because we'd spent resources on something that wasn't the version that they are playing. And it's the same kind of fear, right? This is something that's causing at least a minor distraction, but the goal here is to improve Path of Exile as a result. And probably create a lot of fun for the people who do want to play it.
Господи, тут переживают, что будут ресурсов много
So on
выделяться на
Beta,
этот
you
хардмод.
talked about this a little bit. Like you and you talked
В
about
прошлый
how
раз
like
тоже спрашивали,
being
типа,
somewhere,
вот вы
somewhere after
хотите
Legion,
рояль,
maybe
делаете
since this was the
хардмод и
first one,
все-все-все,
where
а типа у
leagues
вас
would
вообще
start
получится?
dropping like everything from everywhere.
Крис
You
сказал,
would start
что
seeing a
для
lot
нас
of
это
like very,
больше
very other
хобби.
league mechanics, and you seem to agree that that was not a good solution. And you've started working on that a little bit with like you were buffing the drop rate on Metamorph, where they would drop more catalysts and stuff. But are you now just moving more and more towards like, you know, Delve being specifically the best place to get fossils and resonators, maybe even more so, or even the only place, and same with like Metamorph? And are
Вот
we going to see
сейчас очень интересную вещь Зизаран говорит. Он говорит, что недавно сделали в этом ап, что больше Метаморф стал дропать каталистов, хотя я что-то это не заметил, блядь.
Даже не слышал про такое.
И он говорит, будут ли изменения направлены в то, что, допустим, фосили ты, блядь, только в Делве можешь найти. Масла только на Блайте. И все в таком духе. Как ты считаешь, это, Миша, правильный подход? Мне кажется, так и должно быть. Плюс-минус.
Ну, по факту как бы да, но а с другой стороны, а что будет дропаться, допустим? Ну вот смотри,
Мгм.
и ты защищаешь грушу.
Грушу, так. Это...
Что ты хочешь в качестве наград увидеть? Все сундуки, там три типа сундуков. Масла, оружие и броня, и бижа, или что еще?
Масла я бы хотел увидеть.
Ну, как бы масла будут, оружие, броня, бижутерия будет. А что еще? Все остальное будет лиг-контент.
Нет, валюта, кусочки. Ну, хочешь, когда даже этих не будет, блядь. Ну нет.
Не, ну
Харбрингеров?
типа смотри, фосили уберут, делириум уберут, все уберут, и типа, это как в пример только грушу ввел.
А делириум
Вот,
сундуков,
допустим,
а делириум сундуки на груши есть? Да?
ну, не факт, это я груш... Ну, возьмем, например, экспедицию.
Ну хорошо, понял, это просто был такой...
В этом
У меня
плане.
36
Типа,
листов
просто
на
дропа,
карте.
мне кажется.
Подожди, почему я 36 листов на карте? Чё это так?
Еще раз кайфанул.
А из-за чего это происходит, пацан?
Это шанс 5% или сколько там? Что часть мобов заменится на желтых. Или рарный заменится на желтых.
Тут и красные есть, блядь.
Ну, просто на
Ну я
листах.
поохочусь, короче,
Просто я как бы согласен, это было бы классно. Ты как бы...
Ну,
у
а
тебя
новые
больше
награды
было вариантов.
придумать. Ты к
Да
этому
даже
ведёшь.
не то, что новые награды, а то, что это надо как-то аккуратно сделать, чтобы, блядь, все не поломать нахуй. Потому что я согласен, было бы хорошо, что... Ну, фарм был бы более такой разносторонний.
Угу. Ну, потому что вот раньше кластеры супер ценились, а сейчас можно у карлика, блядь, наторговать.
Ну, не выходя из хайдаута.
Раньше поэтому и ценился фарм 5 арбов супер зарафанных карт, потому что там, блядь, пиздец, сколько 84-й кластеры стоили, а сейчас там только парочка стоит больше экза, наверное. Вообще есть больше экза?
Мгм.
Вот такой вот, да.
Скорее всего, нету. Потому что я 84-й на 6 пассивок продавал за 60 или 70 хаус.
А почему Солярис первая очень плохо умирает на этой карте? Я всегда буду первый Солярис убивать. Что это принцесса Селестия. Она очень плохо умирает.
Просто, мне кажется, такие вопросы надо было задавать, когда еще не все вещи везде были.
Мгм.
Просто вводится новая лига, и в ее награды входит весь контент из прошлых. Сколько было прошлых лет? Овер до хуя. И типа... Да, конечно, в той же экспедиции основная часть дохода это типа кусочки, артефакты лиговские, но много стоят и другие вещи. Типа,
Да.
просто по мелочи, и те же самые контракты с хейста можно продавать, и монетки.
Там я заметил неадекватное количество эссенций падает. Ну просто неадекватное.
Ну, мне кажется, они в плане эссенса что-то намудрили, потому что, ну, то, что там падают тир 8 вот эти эссенсы.
Ну, тир 8, просто их очень много падает. Нигде, никогда, ни в одном контенте я не продавал по столько эссенций, сколько после карлика. Из-за того, что вот эти quantity мод на них распространяются, их там просто вот, ну, строчка высотой в экран, нахуй,
Кстати,
эссенции.
вчера пару карт пробежал, заметил такую вещь, что рарити сундуков на картах осталось.
А? А че? А зачем тогда?
Я не знаю. Писали, что убрали, я заметил, что как бы на картах, ну, в логбуках убрали.
А на
А что на
картах
картах оставили? Ну, в маленьких вот этих, да.
Фиг
В
знает.
чем прикол, непонятно.
А, я слишком быстро пробегаю. Не обращаю внимания, что не написано. По задумке ты должен первую Солярис убивать. Потому что я вообще, ну, супер жирная. Игра говорит, бей Лунарис. Я такой, нет, я бью Солярис. Так, дальше включаем Крис.
See, like a lot more of this going forward. Like, how are we? What's the current state of this?
Our intention is that each league is the best place to get the rewards from that league, but not the only place necessarily. So if you want to get fossils, you can get them from a variety of places, but the efficient, targetable place to get them is by going to Delve, and so on and so on. And this is because we want the content to have an identity. We want there to be a degree of target farming with regard to those particular rewards, because it is good for there to be a slight bias there. And we don't want it so that a player who feels that they hate the idea of doing Delve feels that they must do it, especially in, say, Solo Self-Found, in order to get the fossils. And so the ideal endpoint we get here is that you can get these fossils and scarabs and so on from other means, but the best way to do it is through the content that is associated
Крис
with it.
хорошо
There
объяснил.
are things like essences.
Он объяснил то, что, мол, да, сама эта идея хороша, но проблема в том, что не всем людям хочется прям делать что-то, чтобы получить это. Если тебе надо хоть немного
да.
получить, то есть, допустим, буквально пару фосилей кинуть в шмотку, это хорошо, что тебе не надо идти в Delve, там забуриваться, блядь. Тут он правильно это говорит.
Ну, типа на том же трейде, да, вот, на ССФ это было бы грустно.
Угу.
Ты бы очень много времени на все убивал. Есть такое.
That we really need to fix up, right? Like, you're getting way more essences from just general essence chests and rewards than you actually do from essence encounters currently. And so there is certainly a long way to go here, but philosophically...
Да, он отметил, что иногда это выходит за рамки их идей, как ситуация, когда ты получаешь больше эссенций из сундуков, чем если бы ты бы их таргетли фармил. Это он правильно сказал.
Okay, a lot of people are asking for quality life features like auto sort or an inventory deposit. Is that something you are looking into at all?
No, we're not. That's back to the philosophical stuff again, item weight and all of that, which I've ranted about a fair amount. But no, we don't want to do an auto sort or inventory deposit. So we can talk about these, right? So auto sort is where for your inventory or your stash, you can click a button and it moves the items around, potentially to group things and maybe make more space, right? Because it's annoying to have to move items around, so you press the button and it consolidates your stuff and you've got some space. So aside from the item weight argument of the fact that, you know, we want these things to feel real and therefore you have to move them around and all of that, which is creating busy work for players, and I know exactly how they feel about that. We just crossed another thing off the bingo card, I'm sure. But aside from all of that, auto sort has problems where what type of space do you even want? Do you want a 2x4? Do you want single slots? It's hard to actually come up with an algorithm that does that well, and then we don't even necessarily want that in the first place. With regard to mass deposit, we're talking saving some clicks when you go and control click your stuff into the stash. As in, along the line of the affinity slippery slope, right? Previously, you have to go to the stash tab you want to put the thing in, control click it in, go to another stash tab, control click it in. We added affinity so you could just spam control click, and the users are like, cool, you've removed half the clicks, can you remove the rest? By making it so I press a button so everything is just instantly stashed. this is in the direction of the game becoming a spreadsheet, right? Like if it's just a thing where you don't care about your inventory, you just walk, because they want auto-looting of items on the ground under certain circumstances like currency and so on. So you just walk near the items, they get absorbed into your inventory, you go to town, it just smushes it into your stash. It may as well email you a spreadsheet of what you've got at that stage, right? Like why do we need a game client? And we're just very resistant to going further down that slippery slope. In the case of something like affinities, that was a concession we'd make. It does help, but we're not going to go the whole way to the spreadsheet dream.
Right. Yeah. I think obviously like part of the why people are feeling this way as well is because of the insane amount of clicks in Path of Exile compared to any other game. Like
I love the fact that chat is saying true for this one. I was expecting to look over there and see no fun allowed, but yeah. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay. It's just like it's a very large amount of clicks. I don't know if you saw the Ziggy was experimenting with like tracking the amount of clicks he did from Path of Exile, and it was a lot of clicks.
Yeah, I'm aware. Like we've been talking about solutions, and the work we're doing on on stacking of currency and so on is going to help quite a bit.
Right. Okay, so you brought up affinity systems as well. Are there any updates coming to the affinity system to make it more customizable?
No, but that's not because philosophically we don't want to. It's just that I don't know of any problems it has, right? Like if you have feedback about how the affinity system could be improved or how we can make it better, we'll consider it. So please, let me know now if you've got any. Otherwise, start the Reddit thread and get some feedback. So we don't want to make it too easy, but it can be improved.
So just off the top of my head, right, you could have either a customizable one that you just have a lot more room, but even adding things like gems, for example, right? A lot of people want that.
So far, we've made affinities for stash tabs that we sell. The idea being if we sell a tab, there's an affinity for it, and we also enable that affinity on free tabs as well. Like, to be clear, if we release a gem tab, you don't have to buy it for gem affinities to be a thing where you can put them in one of your stashes. Now, we are careful to not add affinities for literally everything, because we do want it so people have to choose, where their stuff goes to some extent. But if there's demand for things like gem tabs and so on, that creates an affinity at the same time. It's not one that we'd really put a lot of effort into.
Sure, but I don't necessarily know if people just want more tabs. Like, I'm sure there would people that would be buy that too, but then you're also gonna have the people complaining about more tabs and blah blah feeling forced to buy things. But is there ever going to exist affinities for things that don't have tabs?
So the goal here is to make it so that there's less changing between tabs, right?
Well, it's just like I don't understand why they're like just adding more value to quad tabs, for example, seems like a good thing as well, or just tabs in general.
Well, I can imagine the degree of customization could get pretty complex when you're like, okay, well, I want ID'd rare items to go in here, except when they're items that go in my chaos recipe stuff, and then they go over here, and to actually read your mind will be a bit tricky for the rules, so that's why we've kind of gone broadly. Like, clearly this is currency, it goes on the currency tab. Clearly that's a map, it goes over there. Clearly this is a div card, like quite broad categories.
Sure, but we have, for example, like prophecy and gem tabs would be easy things that don't even necessarily need their own tab, but would be really good to have as part of the affinity.
Quality of life,
to be
говорят.
completely honest, do not expect prophecy to remain part of the game for long. Like, let's rule that tab out.
Ага. Крис в открытую сказал, что они хотят пророчество убрать. Так, он прямо в открытую сказал, что они видят, что пророчества, я привожу дословно, останутся надолго частью игры. Он прям вот так вот сказал. Это что такое?
Нет, сказал убрать или оставить?
Нет, он сказал, он не видит, что...
не видит, я
Да,
понял.
пророчество как часть игры в долгосрочной перспективе. Уж тут говорят про табы разнообразные.
Не, ну они же типа подготавливают почву к PoE 2 все-таки.
Ну-ка еще раз переслушаю.
Oops, I shouldn't have said that. Gem tab we...
Да, он сам сразу после этого он сказал oops, I shouldn't say.
Что?
Сразу после этого он сказал oops, I shouldn't say that.
Prophecy to remain part of the game for long. Like, let's rule that tab out. Oops, I shouldn't have said that.
Oops, I shouldn't. Спалил, что не будет больше пророчеств.
Gem tab we could.
Goodbye, Purple Lady.
Ну, гем-тап, на самом деле, ну, я не
Is
знаю.
there
Ну,
sort of a plan to maybe give
смысл?
Ну
Гем-то.
нет, а для качества, дядя Миша, для качества вполне себе пригодилось бы, блядь.
Так ты берешь большую вкладку и все.
Ну,
Потом
у меня нету
раз,
большой
раз в день
вкладки.
чистишь. А зато ты хочешь вкладку под гемы.
Ну да, он, кстати, сказал, вот, про большую вкладку, он действительно сказал это, что они не хотят, чтобы вот такие вкладки, как большая, не утрачивали свои ценности. Вот что такое прозвучало, кстати. Ты, блядь, прям мысли Криса прочитал. Гений, что ли?
Не, ну типа, блядь, под гемы, мне кажется, даже маленькой бы хватило. Просто тебе бы чуть чаще ее пришлось.
Ну, мне хватает, я так и
Ну вот.
использую.
В том, как бы, и дело.
Ну вот про пророчество, да, потому что как бы куда им, блядь. Ну и сейчас же мало падает, вот в чем-то еще фишка. Ну, совсем мало сейчас падает. Это раньше, блядь, ты за один
Мало
симулятор.
падает, мало юзаются скорее. Тоже. Они как бы такие.
Ну, не все
Большинство.
юзаются, да. Далеко не все.
Но тогда им надо будет систему вот этих хапа вещей переделывать. Как-то. Которые апгрейдятся. Две версии, у которых есть. Кстати, заметил, когда крафты подбираешь, там прилетает Елена и что-то там пиздит этот крафт.
Нет.
Тоже так только заметил. Сколько уже играем?
Станок?
Казалось бы.
Это станочные ты имеешь в виду крафт?
Да, да.
Не, вообще не замечал. Жестко.
give a free tab to people, like if that you can work towards, for example. Like, you know, you complete Act 10 or something, you get a tab, or specifically even a premium tab, one that you can start selling stuff off, because that's a very powerful tool. So maybe gate it behind, you know, playing enough of the game.
This is a tricky one because I definitely see the argument that A, it could cause people to buy more tabs or be a gateway to tabs, right? Secondly, it does help for players who are playing free and want more capacity, right? Like I'm sympathetic towards a user who has the 4 base tabs and is gradually finding them more full as we spam the game full of stuff. The tricky part is that selling tabs, especially the first tab you get, is kind of our core monetization. Like a lot of users will wisely, I say wisely because they're being careful with their money, just buy a small amount of currency, you know, currency maybe a map tab, and then spend nothing else on the game because they have limited resources, but they feel that those are important purchases. And to some extent, if we gave them a third of that value for free, it might cut out a third of the value that we receive from a lot of our incremental users. And the bulk of users who just make up the people that spend 20 bucks on tabs and that's their lifetime spend, that does contribute a lot to our bottom line. And so this is one thing that's good in theory, but it could also have a negative impact. And I want to make sure we've assessed that before we accidentally jump into it, because I really, really don't want to accidentally hurt our revenue. That's like number one thing I shouldn't be doing.
Right. What about a compromise like a limited, like say half a currency tab and half a premium tab that you can then upgrade later?
I'm open to this, right? Like maybe the solution is that we do a trial of some type and we clearly indicate that this is a temporary promotion and see how it goes with a group of players for maybe one league and, you know, see
Right.
what the results are. And if we can get data to say that overall it helped spending and stuff, then that's great. And then if it has a negative effect, we just have to undo it and bear the rage.
Right. That makes sense. And as far as like the premium subs and stuff, have you guys considered about just removing the like non-premium tab entirely now that there's like, you know, it's kind of most people aren't going to use things like procurement or acquisition or post on the forums. And people obviously want to use like the pathofexile.com/trade.
It's tricky because people have paid for premium tabs because they're better than regular tabs. And so if we were to then go and remove the regular ones or change this too much, while, you know, I'm not saying it's lawsuit material, it's certainly feel bad material.
Дядя Миш,
and
когда
making
будешь
people that
дома
are choosing to
закинешь,
spend
там
money feel
валок
bad is a
30
problem.
есть
Like, we have to be
валок?
really careful changing
МБ
anything related to
с
stuff
тех не
people have spent
продавал.
money
Я
on.
закину тебе
Because
потом.
it, you know, it's remarkable how a small change can cause people to feel very bitter about something like that. So we'd rather have the tabs be just incremental improvements. Like we added affinities as a free thing rather than making people pay to get an additional upgrade, because we kind of feel that nominally they've chosen to pay that extra buck for a premium tab
Неинтересная
compared to
тема
the
пошла,
regular
блядь,
ones.
какие-то
They've chosen that
та,
they want those tabs
вкладки,
to,
блядь,
be
за...
nameable and
Ой,
colorful.
в прошлый раз они тоже задупились, вроде что-то вопросы задавали, и что-то перешли на какие-то MTX-темы, и я такой думал,
Well,
Was that a
нахуя?
discussion that was had, making affinities like a viable thing to begin with?
Well, I mean, there's always discussion
Я,
of
блядь,
making the tab
не
system more
помню, но там
complicated, so you
очень
can
какая-то
individually
душная
pay a
тема
little bit of
была.
extra money for each tab, like a point here and there and so on, but there's enough implementation problems standing in the way of that it never gets very far. And there's the nice thing about generously saying this is a feature that's available for free. Like stash tab folders, for example. They've been really useful, and we briefly discussed should we be selling these, and the answer of no, let's just give them to people. They already spend enough money on the tabs that lets them organize them better and feel good about it. We probably could have sold this
Что
off the
там тебе
folders for 50
вышло?
cents
30
each, and it would have been
Uh-huh.
acceptable, but
Что глянул?
we think this was a better plan overall.
so what about a compromise? And I know I'm like asking a lot about
столько
this, but
есть.
like trading is such a core feature of the game. What about letting the normal tabs at least trade? Like, sure, keep the like coloring scheme and keep the naming scheme, but at least let everybody have
А
one
подожди,
trading
даже если у
tab.
тебя нету одной
It's such a
трейд-вкладки,
core
ты вообще
feature of
никак
the game.
трейдиться не можешь.
I'm not opposed to this, though it does touch the two things we discussed before. One of them being,
На
if we
премиум
screw
вкладка
around with this,
должна
someone
быть
could say,
для трейда.
I spent money buying that in order to trade, and now it's available for free for everyone. And while, I repeat, I don't think that that's actually like a legal problem, I do think we have to be careful about how people perceive it. And secondly, no, second thing's gone. Yeah, sorry, getting too old.
Sorry.
A good enough answer, and yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I'm open to it though, right? Like, I'm not saying no to that. It's something that we probably should experiment with.
Что-то,
There's
кстати,
There's also
тут
questions
челики
of shell
говорят,
accounts
что
as
типа
well,
в 3.16 уже
where a
будет.
person could register 1,000 accounts to be
Сплюснут
able to list
атлас.
stuff on trade for free.
Мне
That is a
казалось,
thing.
позже.
Currently, you have to spend money before you're
Ну,
able to
может быть,
get access to the
внезапно
system. And so that helps prevent
коснется
abuse,
через
when
пару
it's tied to an
месяцев
account
эта
with
тема
purchases on it.
с 4
Sure. I
регионами.
get that. That is a lot of effort though. If that person's gonna make like
Ну,
Говорится,
логично,
Ready-
на каждого
Ready-
гварда свой
probably
регион.
don't have the like biggest intention of spending money on the game to begin with.
Что же,
Right, but what if
слушай,
there
что
are a
они там
large
сегодня
syndicate
болтали?
of item farmers with massive automation and, it's...
Right. Right.
It is concerning, because right now, the large syndicates of item
But-
farmers can't easily...
Do we not have bots already?
I don't want to make it worse, and we're
Right.
working very hard. Like, our bot situation is rather good at the moment, right? Like, people use the word solved, and I say to them, it is not solved, and get all angry. But, that's just me with my strong opinions about that.
Right.
Right now, the payment thing is an issue, right? Like, if a bot network needs to get currency tabs and so on, which they want to do for efficiency and various internal reasons, they have to spend money on this, and then we can attack them from a payments point of view. We can see what cards they're using, and we can, unfortunately, often stolen credit cards, which is kind of sad, but either way, it's an angle, right? But that they can be all anonymous behind proxies if there's no need to put any actual real money into our account.
Right. That makes sense.
Or, cynically, we want the bots to pay us. That's a really good argument the chat should be making. I'm kidding, though.
That you
Чё?
eventually ban
Там в чате
and
говорят.
encourage them to pay you again,
В
right?
чате Криса говорят,
Unfortunately,
заставьте
because of the
бота
cashbacks,
платить
we
вам,
lose
блядь,
very
мзду
time on the poor
процент.
victims who used her as credit card use. So what we'll often do is refund the purchases when we realize it's credit card fraud, we'll ban the account, refund the purchases so that we avoid the chargeback fee and the poor guy in middle America doesn't lose his $10.
Right. Okay. Next thing people were curious about was the tier 4 Ashley nerf. Was that too hard? It wasn't a
Эшли
guaranteed
нерф, а
way
что
to
там
finish
Т4
items.
Эшли нерф сделал?
Раньше она добавляла мод, а сейчас она remove at работает так.
А, то есть один убирает, съедает, да,
Да,
рандом.
рандомный.
А, ну это сильно было. Так подожди, не, Валарба, блядь, совсем другое делает, на.
По-другому
Она,
работает.
блядь,
Немножко.
все перероливает, да?
Она, да, перероливает предмет, реролл делает, и типа, и один из
Already,
делает
because obviously
один мод
sometimes you could
вылет.
just get something that wasn't relevant for your item. Having the forced annulment
Конечно,
seems
можно
too
играть со
much.
всякими
Maybe if you
суффикс
felt it
или
was too
префиксами
powerful or too
change и прочее.
guaranteed, what about diluting the pool more instead
Блочить
of the
некоторые
annulment?
моды.
And obviously killing
Anyway.
Katarina is already considered a pretty bad downside because she resets all the relationships and the syndicate board.
So we felt this was just too powerful. It's basically an exalt that, rather than acting like a normal exalt, guarantees some form of high tier mod. You're right, you can miss occasionally, but it still basically only gives really good mods. Having a guarantee of a minimum amount of power is not something we want to have our crafting system enable, and that's why there's the annulment, so you're taking a risk with it. It's worth noting people still finish their items off with mastercrafts, even though those are generally a lot weaker than these high tier veiled mods. In terms of the math of whether you should kill Katarina or not, Ashling isn't the only reason to kill Katarina, of course. There are a lot of other good rewards available. A lot of people feel that the rewards of the kill are more valuable than the loss of relationships, including people on our dev team. And yeah, we're keeping a close eye on this one, but we just felt it was too powerful before, again, creating the atomization problem that we're trying very hard to keep an eye on.
Could have imagined a lot of people thought it was almost a slap in the face to the, people that want the deterministic crafting, where you're like, oh, okay, here's still a little bit of deterministic crafting left in the game. It's too good, now we'll take it away, or we'll still let you have it, but gambling, which is what everyone's, main problem with the PoE crafting system apparently is these days, which is something was only brought up ever since, like, Harvest came into play, I feel. So just,
Once you show someone there's a lever, they want you to pull the lever, if you see what I mean. You can create a purely gambling system and it's acceptable for enough years until you accidentally experiment with something that's more deterministic, and then that's how the game has to be. Sorry that sounds a bit cynical, but yeah, we're a little frustrated by that, but it is completely understandable response to it.
Did you find that interesting as well? Because, like, prior to the whole Harvest system, the crafting system basically fine, right? It's gambling, you get sometimes rewarded, it feels good, you don't,
Пора уже
and
чайпить
obviously
еще
it feels
раз.
bad, but there's something to chase. And then all of a sudden this
Я
system
пока
comes out
еще,
and everyone's
я
like,
еще не...
well, the rest of the game is just gambling and that's shit and it's always been
Ну ладно,
shit.
и Зара
Did that
добегу.
feel like just kind of
Какого
interesting to
уже?
learn?
Схожу.
Третьего?
Второго.
Yeah,
Нет,
it's
второго.
Какой акт?
the lessons
Ну,
from this are
заканчиваю.
experiment less.
Когда что
to be
заканчиваю, акт
honest,
с
right? Like,
паучихой.
if I had a
Ага.
clean
Перед
slate
паучихой
and a new
пошел
community
и
that
Зару
didn't have
сбегать.
expectations,
Это
I
седьмой,
think the solution of
получается?
like make sure you're
Скорее
presenting
всего,
people
да.
with stuff that you know is the right direction for the game, rather than occasionally go in the wrong direction and go, how about this? Because to some extent, if you go in the wrong direction and they say, I hate it, you're like, okay, I've got it, we understand. We do that, we're good at that one. But when you go in the wrong direction and they say, I love it, make it this now, and you think, oh, what have I done? That's the problem.
Кстати, тут чел тоже
So, I
тему
don't
говорит,
necessarily think
типа,
everybody absolutely
то, что
loved
челы, которые
crafting
в пати
before
бегают, они
Harvest came in.
бегают же
I
не,
think they maybe
ну,
tolerated
которые
it,
больше,
like,
чем
okay,
два,
there's
не
always
только же
people
с
that
аур-ботами,
wanted
еще и с
more deterministic
курс-ботами,
crafting. Look how popular multi-mod
допустим.
was. But there was nothing else. And I think
И
was it Magic
типа
the Gathering
решение, как
Demko,
фиксить
where, or maybe this is
аура-ботов,
quote
ну,
from you, but
примерно
like
может быть
your
понятно. Это
audience is good at
на
identifying the
игроков,
problem,
допустим,
not
меньше,
always necessarily at making suggestions on how to
чтобы
fix it. And
действовала
for a
аура,
lot of
меньше эффект
people, a
был.
lot of the things they
Вот, а
a
с
lot of the things
курс-ботами
that they
как
didn't enjoy got fixed by Harvest, right?
их в
That's
этом
why there was
плане
such a big
нерф-
change. Because
Они
now
жесткий
maybe people
эффект
didn't
еще
like know
курсы
what they
разгоняют,
wanted,
или что
but
они
maybe
вообще
for a
делают?
lot of people what they wanted
Так
was
они, по
Harvest.
сути, кучу курс на мобов вешают.
Мгм.
Вульну или Викнес, Диспер, все вот эти. Инфибл. Короче, тоже.
Ну, Кэрик-то, как правило, бьет колдом, скорее всего.
Ну, чуть слабее, чем аура-бот, конечно, в пати, но тоже
Раньше
бустят.
бустят.
И типа, а чё ты им будешь фиксить? Проверять, в пати ты или нет, чтобы разный эффект курс был, или... Непонятно, потому что действуют они все-таки не на игроков, а на
Мгм.
монстров. Тут есть такое. Хотя, может, сейчас у них разговор пока идет.
So that's why there was such a big like changeover.
Yeah, and we understand that deterministic crafting has a role in the game, right? Like, we could go... If you want to see a game without deterministic crafting, try hard mode. So... in the core game, though, we understand it has its place, and we're working on finding the right place for it.
Right.
Do you think part of the solution would be just to make current crafting in PoE more
Ну,
like
кстати, как вариант, я
streamlined,
могу
as in,
предложить,
like,
что, типа, может,
less
какое-то
confusing?
количество максимум
Because
курсов,
a lot of
допустим,
people
не больше 2 или не больше 3
don't have
сделать.
any idea what to
Так,
do
вообще
when
в
they
игре.
get into it.
Не, зачем ты? Так не дает так много курс бот. И то, что он гонит эффект курсы-то, наверное, это жестко еще влияет.
Не знаю.
По сути-то на мобов же марки не действуют. Сейчас что он только или Викнес накладывает, и Айсбайт.
Не, ну
Всё.
типа живучесть дает. Пати.
Ну Инфибл.
Инфибл ТЧ.
Инфибл
Ты
ТЧ.
брал че.
Ну,
Потом может быть панишмент, кстати говоря. Тоже курса.
ну она это панишмент взрывы дает, насколько я знаю.
Не уверен.
Но она взрывы дает, то есть,
Может быть.
когда моб умирает, он вокруг взрывается и дамажит.
into the end game,
Вот.
whatever. And there's not even very good information out there from
Типа
the
просто
user base
как
or
кап
streamers
сделать,
because
допустим.
it's so goddamn hard to
Ты,
put up.
ну, ты как бы можешь
sort of
получать
crafting
дополнительную
guides that
курсу из разных
become
источников,
outdated,
но
lead
не
to
больше
leaks,
скольки-то.
everything changes all the time. So
Okay.
just more like in-game friendliness for it.
I kind of imagine something like an advanced item view, which lets you like easily. I know we have an advanced item view, but I imagine something that's kind of interactable, where you can click on a mod to see what else is in the family and what else rolls at a certain level, and you can change the level brackets and see what mods are possible. And like it's a bunch of work for sure, but there's almost the ability to have kind of an item workshop kind of thing when you're crafting, so you can really clearly understand what's
Но
possible with
марки,
each
но
action you're
марки
about to
все-таки,
do.
наверное, они вручную могут кидать на боссов,
Would be
когда
pretty cool.
доходят.
Unfortunately, a lot of work, but yeah.
Yeah.
With the influx of new players for PoE 2 especially, it could be something that's worth having in place by then.
Something.
The crafting tab. That's a good idea from chat. Eat it behind money. I'm just kidding.
I just thought of something related to the harvesting earlier that I just spaced out and thought about, which was with the fighting things like blister lords and stuff, because there are quite a lot of hard enemies. Which you've not done this with tier 4s. Like if you're fighting a tier 4 beast, you get that. But there are like quite a lot of the tier 3s that are quite hard as well. Maybe not having like the player fight them entirely, because that feels very bad for a lot of people right now. Like seeing those monsters that are maybe hard to craft, having to defeat them and not getting anything.
Right. So even though you get told beforehand, you don't like the fact that you then have to fight a monster that you are not getting a craft.
Yes. That feels very bad.
Okay, I'll pass that feedback onto the team. I mean, there are ways to. Yeah, there are ways to solve that for sure.
Right. Okay. So we're moving on to like the Atlas and the in-game. I'm slightly worried that you answered this when I spaced out. I'm gonna ask it instead
Yes.
just to make sure.
That exact question.
The
has-
harvest thing we did, yeah.
Yes.
I
Okay, that's
basically
what I
brought
thought.
that
That's
up.
what I thought I heard, but I spaced out a little bit and I was like, did he say that? Right. Okay. Sweet. That's already been answered. Next up, why can we not farm conquerors at lower tiers?
So I had to go to
Вообще,
some
кстати,
team
Крис
members for
говорил
this.
по
I'm like,
поводу
what even
разных
is this
мобов тут,
question? What are they asking
то,
for?
что
And they
они
kind
хотят
of-
сделать, чтобы типа вот эти эффекты, которые у них под ХБ пишутся,
Мгм.
были более визуально понятными,
Мгм.
и в то же время, ну, типа сократить их количество, допустим.
Ну, блядь, мне кажется, что им визуально понятно ни хера не поможет. потому что-
Вот. И типа сделать так, чтобы рарные мобы, когда они, допустим, рядом с друг с другом находятся, они ну, стакались или как-то взаимодействовали, короче, вот эти ауры. Я такой думаю, Крис, блядь, пощади.
Подействовали нахуй. Чё? Чтобы еще больше пизды давали или чё?
Чтобы синергия какая-то была между ними.
Ага, охуенно. Синергия между мобами.
kind of
И так
reflects
там
that back.
рарники ебут.
Будут, блядь. Кто тоже спрашивает. Ну,
So this. I'm like,
Особенно
what
в
even is
начале лиги, вот там вообще грустно было.
да.
Да шмоток нет, ничего нет, ты пытаешься запрогрессить Атлас, тебя ебут, аж плакать хочется.
А его тут спросили, почему мы не фармим конкьюров на лоу тир,
I
блядь.
had to go to some team
А, я,
members
кстати,
for this.
слышал,
I'm like, what
они
even is this
обсуждали
question?
челики.
What are they asking for? And they kind of reflected
Я
it back to
примерно
me
ответ
with the
Криса
question of,
знаю.
why do we want to do this, right? Why would you want to fight a lower tier conqueror? Is it for practice? For awakened gems? Is it because you want to get their high level rewards with less risk? Like, what's the goal here of farming
Well, I
lower
would-
tier?
I would think it's because whenever you make a new character, you know, you've done a whole bunch of progression in the previous one, you've beaten everything, it's done like, you know, let's say Awakener 8. You make a new character and it's like level 75 or something and it's gone through a few tiers of maps. It can't realistically have fun or stand a chance against the max tier conquerors conquerors until, another 10, 15 levels or a bunch of gear progression. And thus you're just like grinding through and slogging low tiers until mid tiers and like just getting
Я не
no
понимаю,
additional-
что они хотят, Матхил, что тут он говорит, что там, блядь, ты пришел с сюжетки, 70 у тебя левел, у тебя нет никаких шансов против хакера, так ты же, блядь, достать хоть стоуны можешь, я не понимаю.
Так, я вот тоже не понимаю, просто вот
Те
тут
ж-
челы обсуждали, просто там действительно такая тема есть, что типа, ну вот он говорит, прибежал. А когда у тебя персонаж не первый, мне кажется, тоже, ты довольно быстро ему левел вкачаешь и уже будешь ебало ему разрывать.
с точки зрения хардкора, может, они смотрят, или Миши? У тебя ж нихуя не
для
будет.
Ну, в этом плане, да, я не думал.
Но ты же достать можешь, вот стоуны-то все равно.
Ну, тогда они не будут появляться у тебя. А он хочет, чтобы, типа, они конкуры появлялись
У тебя
в этом
Сириус не
плане.
будет садиться. Ну, нет, тогда
Нет.
тогда проблема есть, я
Типа
понял.
после 4 кругов они только с 4 у тебя будут садиться.
Тогда проблема существует, да, реальная проблема для хардкор-плееров.
Для хардкора я, да. Для хардкорыча я согласен.
Да, реальная проблема существует. Я думаю, просто нет, нет, проблема, да, получается, есть. Еще даже не... Опять, что ли, 36 без 100? 1 из 39.
Ну что, как оно, господа?
Подкасты смотрим.
Запись подкаста?